Then we're gonna start now. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So today we have Leon Han, Leon Han. Sorry, we have Leon Han, who's a PhD student in the Comp Bio program. He was raised in Beijing, China. Did his undergraduate degree at Peking University, where he got a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Sciences. And he's broadly interested in genomics and microscopy, currently focusing on spatial genomics in the Streets Lab. And he's also an amateur graphic designer, photographer, enjoys cycling, reading, board games, and trading card games. So with that, yeah, thanks for joining us, Leon.
Oh, I'm muted. Okay. I think the audio is going in.
Yeah, now that
Yeah,
it looks
okay.
good.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. So today I'm gonna cover some topic about like using fancy tools or like trying to utilize plain text for scientific research. I was very ambitious at the first place, but I also didn't realize I'm a procrastinator. So I wanted to include a demo, but I just ended up making too much slides. So I think it's also an easier format that we can go through. My presentation splits into roughly two parts. The first parts are gonna be is gonna be decomposing some of our commonly seen data. And the second part is going to be how we format the data into some viewable figures or documents. So before we begin, I would like to ask like a really simple question for each of you. Like, what is your very recent data that you generated and where you store them? How do you store them? So this picture is showing like back in the 18th century, like where Linnaeus, I think I don't know if I pronounce it that correctly, had the drawings of the plant specimens that he and his students collected. So this is how they obtained their data and they store their data. So I was wondering what kind of data that you guys recently generated and how do you store or manipulate them?
Sequence data.
Obviously. Yeah.
I don't know, like I never store any work-related data on my local computer.
I have a bunch of trees that I just generated, and right now they're on Savio's Scratch, so let's get off that.
Yep.
For me, it's on OneDrive, local, Ultron, and sometimes Google Drive or iCloud.
Cool.
I also have a bunch of like sequencing summary statistics, genetic sequencing summary statistics that are on Savio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just all on Savio. Hopefully, it's not lost.
Yeah.
I just made a bunch of CSVs and I like store them on my local, but now I like commit them to GitHub, which I'm like a little iffy about doing just because, okay, they're all small enough that you can put them on there, but if I have anything larger, you can't really do that.
Yeah. So we have a pretty consistent response that how we do research is very different from like the early pre-computer area. We generate lots of data that are not directly searchable and viewable on like a physical media. We have to use some of a way to extract our data and use that data to do some kind of visualization. So yeah, like so many data, like how do you keep sane and do your analysis with them or do some kind of like scientific communication is what we are gonna talk about today. Yeah, like this is another example showing that like you can use from sequencing the aggregated sequencing of like lots of samples, we have this like a long sequence file, which is pretty large in gigabytes and at the billion base pair scale. But then you'll have to find a way to interact with the data. And it's non-trivial. Also, if we just look at our local computer, you have those kind of like random data scattered around, and you have to find a time to really organize or archive them. So what is like a clear way to interpret this different types of data that we generate like every day, like it's like everywhere? So I'd like to start with this example, like the tree of life, like this left image as a teaser for the definition that I wanted to convey. So as we went over the different types of data that we discussed about, like we have sequencing data, we have images, we have table CSVs, and we have like personal lab notes and all kind of stuff. Are they really the same, or in a way we can kind of divide them into sub categories? So if we look at this left image, what's your first impression on this like pretty messy note that Charles Darwin wrote hundreds years ago?
It's really my stuff.
Yeah, but this is like an image that is 700 by 1200 roughly, and it's like 15 kilobytes. So if we use the same amount of information, do you think you would use 16 kilobytes or characters to represent this image? Obviously not, right? We use our like optical character recognition, our eyes, to extract information out of the text that we've written. So someone who has a better eye can transcribe this messy sketch into something that other human can read, right? So we can try to see from there, like the case might be that's one generation, blah blah blah, and there is extinction in this tree of life. So also, if we just look at the Darwin Origin of Species, the entire book only has like about less than 1 million characters. So it is really interesting that text, like, or natural language, is really powerful in like abstracting or compressing our like information that we obtain from our other observations or data generation. Also, this is another example, like you say that you have like an entire collection of data. You have like many pages of samples. What would be a way that you can interconnect those samples into something that you can navigate? This would be like an index or some kind of like table that you can link to a specific physical location or a virtual location on your computer. So I'd like to split the data into two types. So the first type is going to be directly interpretable. So broadly speaking, there are like documents that you write. There's like slide decks you make. You have spreadsheets, you have figures. And these pretty much resembles what you see on like the pre-computer era, those books or pages or pictures. But also at the same time, we generate lots of machine-oriented data. Like there are cryo-EM images, there are like genome sequencing, like you have to save your model as a file. That's also kind of a data. We are not going to cover the latter today, but I'm going to talk briefly like how we can use some tools to interconnect the two parts of, or the two categories of data. So what makes data readable? So we know we have two categories of data, right? So if we look at like a random slide or a document, like what do you see from like any types of documents? Like we see here, there are title, subtitle, some footnotes, some images, and some like label text. And if we look at a paper, what do you see? Also, mostly text, some images, and some label text. And if you look at a spreadsheet, you have like multiple like parts of the sheet, but each individual sheet is a table, and the components of the table are numbers or text. So if we summarize those, you can see like text is, or like natural language text is ubiquitous in these types of data or documents that you generate. So we know that texts are ubiquitous, but what about other parts in your document? Like what about images? What about tables? What about equations? But I'm going to convince you that they are all text. So if we look at this Excel sheet, it's a pretty like a crappy data that we have on our qPCR machine. What if you just use some kind of tool to decompress or extract to look into what's inside? Like say you use, instead of like a dedicated software like Excel or Numbers or Google Sheets, what if you use another tool to look at it? So actually, if you just treat the Excel sheet as a zip file, you can actually get different components of the like this file structure. And inside those are actually XML files, which looks like that. Like you can see there are different parts of the sheet that are that has tags and containing and text that are contained. So we can see like A1, B1, C1, D1 here, which corresponds to like different rows, columns, and indices of the table. What about the logo? Could you use another type of tool to look at the logo? Yes, this is a common like interpretation, and these are for raster images. Like usually you see like JPEGs, PNGs, these type of files. But what I'm showing here is a vector format. So no matter how you scale the image, the edges will still remain sharp. And how is that possible? And with like such a small size of the file, like JPEGs, PNGs are pretty large. They are in the megabytes of scale. But this logo is only like less than a kilobyte, I believe. Yeah, maybe like at the similar scale. What if you just use a text editor to open the file, an SVG file? Actually, you can see it's also a text file, but instead you have those anchor coordinates that defines like the points on the image, and also some curvatures that like guides the connection of the coordinates. And obviously we are comp bio, we play with equations sometimes. These formatted equations, like different characters scattered at different locations, can actually be defined by some kind of like underlying text that generates this alternative text. So why is this important? So like our research, like scientific research, is very like at the same time very flexible and dynamic. Like we change our parameters all the time. We do very like subtle changes to our protocols. But also sometimes you want your data to be scalable or your method to be scalable. So sometimes instead of doing 1, you want to do 100. Sometimes like instead of like looking at the table, you want to use some kind of method to deal with like more of them. And this creates lots of very annoying problems sometimes. So say that I want to do like an experiment. I just want to dilute my DNA oligos. They come in like various molar masses. And I start with diluting into like 1 micromolar. That's a standard molar concentration. But for my experiments, I usually want like a different unit, like say like a gram concentration. So for 1 sample, I can actually calculate that. I have like a stock concentration, and then I can calculate like a final concentration. I know what my sample, how heavy my samples is. And I can do like, I can run a quick calculation on a calculator and get like, what's the volume of water I should add. But what if I want to do like it for 100 different samples? Another example could be you have this vector figure that you generated from matplotlib. And suddenly this other day, Aaron says, what if we make the red color appearing in this figure all maybe orange? How would you do that?
When you did it replotted, you use, what is this? Photoshop?
This is Affinity Designer, but you could also use like Adobe Illustrator or something. But for a quick fix, yeah, I'm gonna talk about that. But for a quick fix, you can actually use color replacement in Illustrator or Designer to do like a quick swap of like just to see like different colors, what do they look like? And this is good for like quick testing because you want to immediately see what you modify. But if you have hundreds of those plots or like tens of those plots, this is going to create a problem. And if you want to insert an equation into Google Slides, Microsoft Doc, or say PowerPoint, you can use the built-in equation editor and add the elements to your document. But at the same time, if some kind of symbol were defined mistakenly, or you wanted to make some modifications, how would you apply this modification to all of your equations? So I want to quote this slide from Matthew. I think he did a great skill seminar last year that I did not attend, unfortunately. But I think this plot gives a good idea of like how we should conceptualize the way that we do daily tasks that we do for scientific research. So for the x-axis here is the lines of code written, and the y-axis like is that like the time that you add to the existing code base like per line. So like a quick dirty code is something like that. Like you just do some like on the go calculation or modification. But also if you want to scale it, it's pretty hard. You have to design some kind of like a Photoshop script or some kind of like a complicated Excel sheet for that. And when you change your task between different softwares, it's hard to get this software into another. Say you have an Excel spreadsheet. You have to define like a reading wrapper, say in Python, to extract the different parts of your spreadsheet. But if you formalize what if we just formalize our data in another way so that these are easily interpretable by different tools? Say, if we want to design like a reusable dilution calculator, I would just write those functions and I would take molecular weights or DNA sequences into input, and I get a table as an output or steps of dilution as output. And this will give you like those comprehensive like operations that you could follow. And also like if you have time, you could also use this table as like a guideline for some kind of other liquid manipulation tools like robots or other machines that could do that. For like a plotting cheese that like you just replot it, but how do you replot efficiently so that like every time you change any design style, you can quickly apply to all of your plots. And then you can the simplest solution would be you define some kind of like list or a dictionary that you keep as a separate file or at the head of your notebook. And then whenever you change some design, you can just change the style sheet and you can preview with one plot and apply to another. And for equations, so we know that like LaTeX are text, right? So what if we just keep the slide presentation in text format? So there's a tool called Beamer in LaTeX that you could generate slides based on like text. And then any equations that appeared in your presentation, you could just use like find and replace or some kind of if you want some more specific replacement, you could use regular expression. And then it applies to all of your equations in the same document. So before we go on, I want to like emphasize some key takeaways. So the firstly, text is the foundation of scientific data and communication. And second, a lot of digital content is text actually under the hood. And lastly, if you use text early, it enables retains flexibility, but also enables scalability and reproducibility. So, what are some tools that you could use as like an input for both machine and human? So I'd like to mention two texts that we see all the time. The first one being JSON. You can see use those curly brackets and like columns to define different attributes and values, keys and values. It's like a dictionary. No, like Taiyaki is a cat name. It's it's my friend's cat name. And she's actually 1 year old. Yeah.
Does she outlive it too much?
I have to confirm that, but I just came up with like
What cat
some.
does it?
It's like a
No, I mean like what cat doesn't like tuna?
Oh, okay.
yeah. You're right. Yeah, that's true. But like, but we can see like Jason is like can be a little hard to deal with, especially when you want to nest different like parts. So like you can nest dictionaries into dictionaries and into dictionaries. And this creates like tons of curly brackets that you cannot interpret well enough. But then like this YML was also widely used, is also widely used currently. That is very human readable, but also it retains the functionality to be read by softwares or different programs like Python or Rust, C, things like that. And it uses like a simple indentation structure, which is very direct and straightforward. But after like we know how we can write text or like guidelines for computers.
Wait, hold on. I think Tesla reads text message rather than YAML. If you're talking about environment setup. Like simple like text, TXT file rather than YAML.
Are we talking about the pip requirements?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can cover that like after I can show you like a little like in your local package setup with another way. Yeah, we can talk about that later. Yeah. But you can at the same time you can also use requirements.txt for your like package setup like that. You just state like a matplotlib, numpy, whatever, PyTorch, and then you can just pip install -r requirements and it installs all the requirements for you. This is good for development environments. YAML is actually a dictionary. So like this is maybe more straightforward. It's versatile. So yeah. There's a package called Py. Yeah. Yeah. But like it's not the only way you can use for like dictionary loading into software programs. It's just like an easier human writable and readable format, like just one of the formats that I'm talking about. Yeah. So we know like there are various ways we could write text that are both readable by human and by machine. But if any data was generated by a machine, how would you make it easier for human to interpret? So then we need some kind of text formatting tools. So if you think about what you see on the screen, what's gonna be the first software that comes into your mind? Like you have multiple softwares. What is the software that you use the most in an average day?
Probably your browser.
Yes, your browser. This is pretty obvious, right? We use like Chrome, Safari, Firefox like all the time. But also like what is your browser showing? Like what is that? Like why do you see those like a pretty nicely formatted text like with structures and like beautiful styles? So I'm not gonna talk about JavaScript, but for most static websites, the current standard is HTML5. It's widely used at like most of those websites. We can imagine like you can have like Microsoft Doc or PowerPoint or Google Doc to Google Slides. But these are those big tech companies that has the patents for like different reasons. And it isn't that open that you can just display those files, and different computers have different fonts installed, different operating system. So there must be like a uniform way to display stuff on any random browser or computer. So this is why we have HTML5 and different, this is just one example. We have like other stuff. So what makes like browser so powerful is I think I personally think it's like two points. There are 2 points. The first one is that HTML5 or these web pages are structured. So the style is separated from the content. So in HTML5, you define your content with some kind of like XML text, and then you can add like style sheets like CSS or other stuff to this raw data or raw text to help the browser or other software to render it correctly. So any change in the raw content is pretty simple. You just change the text and that's it. Like you don't have to do anything else. The browser or the render engine handles that for you. Also, it is very easy to navigate because web pages, why we call it web, like why we have this like name for World Wide Web, is that pages aren't standalone documents. They are interconnected. So you can link one page to another very easily. And you can embed that by like some like style operations. So if we look at the CCB Skills Seminar website, you can see the top is like a beautifully formatted web page with those like titles, headers, like details. But if you look at the bottom, this is like a random web inspector. You can see actually these are very like the XML files that I've shown earlier, but with different tags, like this is like one division or like paragraph or something. And this paragraph has the text that corresponds to this paragraph here. So this is how we normally interact with the web or any documents that are like easily shareable. But still, this is pretty like messy, right? Like you have to define different levels of headers or tags between each of your contents to let it render correctly. So can we make this even simpler? Like, is that like something people are doing already? The most like mainstream like simplified version of HTML5 or the content simplification is Markdown. So Markdown, what's great about Markdown is it unifies both the text structuring of HTML5 and the readability. So if we look at this example, you have like heading, subheading, like different heading. You can have like lists, bullet points, have quotes, you have links, and you have bold characters, italic characters. And in HTML5, it's pretty darn hard to render that correctly. But with Markdown, it's actually pretty simple. For the headings, you just use different types of hashtags. And for the lists, you just use, this is like not very different from the list that we see here.
Is it the same if you do it with a bunch of like equal signs or dash signs as if you just do a pound symbol?
Oh, like you mean
Yeah,
like
like
these ones?
compare versus just, like,
Actually,
the hash.
actually, this was the first time I saw someone
Oh,
do
okay,
it this way.
okay.
Yeah.
Makes
But yeah, if you just look at things below here, it's very simple. Like everything you write, you can see in your raw text, but at the same time, you can render it with like a beautiful style, and you can easily copy to other websites, host your own website, make it a slide or something, anything you want to do with it. So, okay, I think we still have some time for the demo, but before that, I want to have like an honorable mention. So we know that the raw texts that are generating those formatted texts is like not so not so neat. Like they are readable, but like not in a way that what you type isn't what you see. Like you're typing extra characters just for the formatting for the machine. But with with editors like Obsidian, or actually you could use VS Code, but I'm just gonna cover Obsidian right now, is that you just start writing Markdown text, and then once you finish every line, it automatically renders it for you. Like there are other editors like Typora and like many like third-party apps for that. But what I like about Obsidian is that it has the same web, like the linking support, like easy to navigate linking support as the HTML5 diagram that I've shown here. So it is very easy to create links in Obsidian, and you can easily navigate your entire document based just by clicking on your app. This is like your local browser. And also at the same time, Obsidian takes raw Markdown files. So if you download a random Markdown file to your computer and add it to your vault or like the folder, it will just render correctly. Say you have a GitHub page, you have something from the forum, you have something from like a random blog post. It will just render correctly. You just download the Markdown, and it will save everything for you. And it all works without taking your data. So the data, like you don't have to, you can host online stuff, but at the same time, it all works locally. So if you have any files that you've generated previously, you just link that to your Obsidian, and then they just works. So I think we still have like a few minutes for I think it's a little short for demo, but happy to take question after that. So the summary is that you don't own the data unless you know enough about it. So the simpler your data is, the easier it is to use with multiple programs or utilities. And also text is not only the abstraction of data, but also you can use text as hyperlinks to connect your knowledge base. You can use text also as a cohesive to make your documents as a whole. And yeah, that's like my conclusion for the talk, and I'm happy to take questions.
So if you go back one slide, the screenshot of the phone, is that when you import it to your phone or you can?
Like so look, generally you just need a syncing utility like say iCloud, or you can host your own server just to get the data synced between devices. But there are like multiple ways to do that, but Obsidian has that built in if you use iCloud or its own syncing. It's like a paid, but if you have an iCloud or OneDrive already, you can just use existing.
And still
Yeah.
like editable on your phone.
Yeah. I don't usually edit on my phone because it's faster typing on a keyboard, but yeah, it's sometimes you need it.
You mentioned, sorry, go. This isn't related, but you were mentioning something about regular expressions for editing your LaTeX files.
Yep.
In slides, what was, I kind of missed what that was.
Oh yeah, like say you define maybe like a few variables, right?
Mhm.
And then after some time point, you want to redefine every NT in your equations to maybe like a R. Then if you have a raw text file, it's like a very simple find and replace, or for any like a little more complicated, you can use regular expression. But if you use Google Slides or like what else, like PowerPoint, it's hard to do that. So I'm not saying that you should use Beamer for every presentation, but if you have a lot of equations, it's better to just use your raw LaTeX source file and convert that into a Beamer presentation, right? That's the more straightforward and easier way of that.
Do that, like, is overly, so I have like on my LaTeX, but then like, how would you use a regular expression?
Oh, actually, I haven't done a ton of Beamer presentations since like graduation, but so when you make the presentation, you just have to add some frames, like for the document. So you change your document class on the header, like document class something Beamer, and it becomes a presentation. And then you divide your parts of your document into frames, which are the slides that you're interacting with. And within each frame, you can define the elements that you have. And then it just renders correctly as your regular text document. Yeah.
Also, what's the difference between HTML5 and CSS?
CSS is if I remember correctly, it's a JSON file for the style only. So like it has nothing to do with the content that you're interacting with. So
But HTML5 also is only about structure, right? It doesn't really, I mean, you can specify color.
yes,
fonts,
yeah.
but doesn't really generate content.
Yeah, I think I conceptualize CSS as something you define here. You have some colors, but then the elements of your graph is defined by your like source file. Like you can apply different skins to your web page. that's what it is doing.
What's the difference between CSS and HTML5?
CSS like is like a master style thing that you can define for some specific scenarios. How would you modify the visual elements of your web page?
Would that be like the CSS is built upon HTML5? Or it's
Doesn't
still-
necessarily, I think. But I haven't really investigated into the history of that. But
Yeah.
normal users don't have to deal with that. Like I use Markdown all the time. I seldom check the CSS file. But you can have different skins like CSS settings for any editor, like VS Code, Obsidian, and change how they look by just few clicks.
Do you like writing your markdowns in like VS Code or do you have another
I use just Obsidian.
that renders?
Like it's both an renderer and editor, and like there's on VS Code you have two planes, right? You have
Yeah.
your source and you have your renderer.
Yeah.
But Obsidian or Typora, like I don't think Typora is is good anymore, but but yeah, like these are what you type is what you see. And actually I switched to Obsidian because I could type equations so much faster. Like let's see, like yeah. Yeah, that's a plugin called Math LaTeX Suite. So it's pretty fast. Like what else could what equation am I typing?
Matrix.
Yeah, I think that's a good demonstration. So P made A A A A B B B C C. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there's a good blog post from Gilles Castel, I think. He passed away like a few years ago, RIP. But that's what his Vim setup inspired me during undergrad. And then someone migrated the entire setup for this fast typing of late LaTeX on Obsidian.
That's all happening locally, right?
It's like very fast, like yeah. But you have to learn a bit, but yeah, like overall I liked it. It's pretty good.
I wish Google Docs had LaTeX support.
Google Docs.
Because it has limited markdown support. Like you just like
Yeah,
type it in, like
yeah.
renders it automatically, and I love that.
Yeah,
But
it's
equations. no.
yeah, like it's hard to interact with those proprietary like documents. Yeah. And one thing to mention, I did the entire presentation with Markdown. You don't have to do that, but you can. All right. I
So is this
guess.
your like presentation?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. That's my entire presentation.
and then where are you presenting it from?
It's a PDF. You can just export
okay.
with the MARP. It's a called MARP engine. And that renders HTML5 slide deck from Markdown. Then once you have the PDF, you can just like present. So it's cool. It's like one of my remaining habits because I was using Vim for LaTeX documents, but I guess I don't have to. It's like a PDF viewer, like it's nothing special. Yeah. yeah, like I don't have any like a lot of expectations for that. All right, thanks guys for joining. Stop screen.